All right. So a little bit about Montgomery for All. If this is your first time to a Montgomery for All meeting, we are a grassroots group organized by the Coalition for Smarter Growth, which is a regional advocacy nonprofit focused on smart growth, housing, land use, and transit issues. And so Montgomery for All is our grassroots wing in Montgomery County. And we are specifically focused on advocating for a general plan that paves the way for a more equitable, prosperous, and sustainable future. And we have a 10-point platform that we put together in 2020. And that platform includes allowing for more housing options, protecting vulnerable communities, providing equitable, safe access to amenities, building a world-class transit network, and more. And that general plan is called Thrive 2050, and that's what we're going to talk a lot about tonight. I think most of the people on this call are pretty familiar with Thrive 2050, but if not, feel free to ask any questions later. You should be able, people are not currently able to unmute themselves, but you should be able to still type in the chat, and that will go to me, the host. And so when we're talking about imagining this future, this vision for Montgomery County in 2050, what does that actually look like? So I really like these mock-ups done by the planning department when they were putting together the general plan, Thrive 2050, which is not complete yet. We're still advocating around it. And you can see here, what does it mean to really transition a wide, dangerous arterial road into one that has thriving, vibrant, walkable, transit-oriented communities around it. So you can see here some mid-rise apartment buildings. I think that's maybe a BRT in the median lane there. There's a bike path with a biker. So both adding more compact housing types, adding new transit options. And then on the right side of the screen, this is an example of what it could look like to transform Colesville Road at Columbia Pike and New Hampshire Avenue into sort of having the physical built environment embody some of these ideas about how we can best grow and grow in a way that is, as we said, equitable, prosperous, inclusive, and sustainable. So some updates on Montgomery for All's advocacy and the organization in general. So we had a really great first public hearing at the County Council. A very brief, for those who might not know about the process of creating this new general plan for Montgomery County. There was a planning department staff draft that the staff of the planning department put together. And then that went to the planning board, which then had their own work sessions, their own public hearing. That was amazing. We had over 80 people and over 60 of those people were enthusiastic Montgomery for All supporters of the plan. And so now that plan has been transferred from the planning board to the county council. And the county council is going to have the first public hearing that it had on the 17th. And then the second public hearing will be on June 29th. And then the Planning, Housing, Economic Development Committee will have their work sessions starting in July, which I am sure that Councilmember Andrew Friedson, who sits on that committee, might talk about a little bit there. And then it will go to the full council, and they have the ultimate authority to approve the plan, to change the plan. And so that's where we're at right now. We're at those county council public hearings. And we had a really great showing of people who were in support of the plan. And if you weren't able to sign up for one of those two public hearings, and a lot of people weren't because they filled up really, really quickly in like 3.5 hours, you can still submit written comments. And you have, I believe Tom Hooker said that you have until July 9th to submit written comments. And if you, and I think my next slide talks a little bit more about how to do that. So we're gonna also start trying to meet with council members, not at our monthly meetings, but sort of going to them in their virtual offices to, bring some of their constituents who are Montgomery for All members to talk to them a little bit more one-on-one about Thrive. So keep an eye out for those. Those will be happening hopefully in July, but maybe going into the fall. And then our next monthly meeting will be July 29th, and that will be an outdoor picnic at Acorn Park and the Newell Street closure in Silver Spring. So I really, really am looking forward to that because it will be the first time that we've all gotten to be together since February 2020. And it brings me a ton of joy to do these virtual meetings, but even more joy to be in person with all of you. So I'm really looking forward to that. Hopefully we can see if we can get a food truck to be there during that time to fuel us all. But I think that that will be a lot of fun. So make sure to put that on your calendars. And then we're going to do we've been an organization really since the start of 2020 for over a year and a half now at this point, but we're going to be really looking at our future as an organization, as Montgomery for All, creating a little bit more of organizational processes and structure. And I've been working with a really great ad hoc steering committee that I see a lot of the people who are on that ad hoc steering committee here tonight about, what does the future of Montgomery for All look like? And I'd be interested to hear from any of you who have attended any of these meetings about what your thoughts are on that as well. So feel free to reach out to me about that. Let's see, I think I might have somebody asked a question. Yes. And so everything you need to know about submitting comments on Thrive 2050 can be found in our advocacy packet. This is a little bit of a long link, but I've sent it around in a few emails and I will absolutely send it around again. You can also find it on CSG's website. And in that advocacy packet, there's a fact sheet, how to sign up to testify, although I guess it's kind of moot at this point. And then how to write testimony, how to submit testimony, and then some sample talking points and examples of testimony that people have submitted in the past. And so hopefully that has everything that you need to know in it, but you can also, as I said, always feel free to reach out to me. It's a really big plan that covers a lot of different issues. And we want people to speak to as many of those different issues as possible. So write about what really animates you. And then, okay. I wanted to provide a little bit of an update because there's a lot of stuff going on in Montgomery County related to land use and housing. And so Thrive is obviously one really, really big one, and that is the general plan update. It's not legally binding. It's essentially a blueprint for how and where we want to grow. It will inform future master plans, but itself does not actually change zoning. But there are two other major initiatives that are looking at zoning. And one of those is there are several initiatives that look at adding different types of housing, more diverse types of housing across the county. One of those is a zoning text amendment from Councilmember Will Jawando that was introduced last December. There's a draft zoning text amendment from Councilmember Hans Remer that was not officially introduced, but also looks at rezoning some single family neighborhoods that are closer to transit, although his focus is more on corridors. And then the planning department is putting together their own recommendations called Attainable Housing Strategies, which we had a public, I don't know if it was technically a public hearing, but it was basically a public hearing about that today, which I thought honestly went really well. We didn't make a big push behind it, but we still had a lot of people who came out in support. And it made me feel pretty optimistic about where we're going to go with things. And so there are all those sort of zoning initiatives happen that are not actually going to be looked at until after Thrive is complete, but the process to get all that stuff ready for after Thrive is complete is happening now. And then finally, there's the Silver Spring Downtown and Adjacent Communities Plan, which is a sector plan update to that area. Happens every 20 years. And it's doing the things that a master plan typically does, but it's also looking at allowing more diverse types of housing in some of the neighborhoods that are adjacent to the central business district. Not looking at including those neighborhoods in this central business district. They're just in the plan's boundary, and they're looking at things like duplexes and triplexes, not high rises. So there's been some confusion around that, and as Montgomery for All people, I want you all to be well informed about the many things that are going on so that you can tell your friends and neighbors so that they're well informed as well. And right now, Montgomery for All is really just focused on Thrive 2050. We plan to have our members, and we'll hopefully officially have members after we do our launch in July. And those members will be able to vote on what our advocacy priorities should be after Thrive 2050 to focus on implementing Thrive 2050. Right now, until Thrive's complete, that's going to be our focus. My role in CSG, I focus on a bunch of other things, but right now Montgomery for All is really just focused on Thrive 2050. All right, so with that introduction, I want to introduce Councilmember Andrew Friedson, who we are very lucky and grateful to have here today. So Councilmember Andrew Friedson is the District 1 council member, and he is a member of the Planning, Housing, and Economic Development Committee, which is the committee that will be reviewing Thrive 2050 starting in July. So it's relevant to have him here today. And he's been a leader on a bunch of different issues. I know I won't be able to list them all right now, but he's been a leader on accessory dwelling units, on open streets, including the streetery in Bethesda that I have behind me here today, advocating for transportation projects in the budget, a bunch of issues that are very close to many of our hearts. And so it's great to have worked with him in the past and to be working with him on Thrive now. And we're very excited to hear your thoughts on Thrive and Montgomery County's future for what it could look like in 2050, and then to engage in some Q&A with you. With that.
Thank you so much, Jane. I really appreciate you having me here. Looks like we have a great turnout, so look forward to taking a number of questions. I appreciate the fact that you have the Bethesda streetery behind you. I'm really excited about that. Whenever I want a popular tweet, I just share one of Jane's tweets, and generally it does well. I apologize, Jane, for the buzzing in your pocket while you were trying to enjoy a beautiful dinner on a beautiful night in Bethesda when we shared that tweet, because it was one of the most popular ones that we did, because it's such a beautiful picture and really shows what it can mean when we reimagine public infrastructure, what a street can be when we think creatively about the fact that it's a street, it's for people, and we have to think creatively about we utilize it for its best use to create community and create a sense of place. So Jane mentioned the Thrive. Obviously, this is a huge undertaking. It's suffice to say my first general plan update as a new council member, but it's all of our first general plan update. So all of us are rookies, so to speak, on this. It's a major undertaking and frankly, a daunting task to think about what the next 30 to 50 years of the county is going to look like. When you think back to what the 1964 general plan was and how much vision it had for creating the agricultural reserve and putting the building blocks in place for what became the inclusionary zoning and MPDU program, which started the process that is frankly unfinished of mixed income communities. But this is a major task. It's one of the reasons why we do what we do. It's really important that we hear from all sides. I think it's also important to understand, as Jane noted, that this is not a zoning document. This is a vision document. This is a strategic plan for how and what we want the county broadly to look like, but it won't implement what ultimately comes from it. Jane mentioned the Fed committee dates and the public hearing coming up. She mentioned the date of the next public hearing, June 29th. I think there are already 45 people signed up for that. We had a full house on the 17th, just the other night. I had the pleasure of taking that public hearing from an inside room at the only theater, which was an interesting place to take it from. Coming in, I couldn't quite make it home from an event, but it was great to see the amount of interest and community engagement on something as important as what our vision is for the kind of county that we want to have for the next 3+ decades. The Fed committee that I serve on is going to take this up as noted. We already have a lot of sessions scheduled for July. July 12th and 14th, we'll start our work, and then we have 2 weekly sessions the following 2 weeks, on the 21st and the 26th. I'm looking at some of the names on here, and I'm expecting several of you to be tuning in. I might be afterwards see Mike English's tweets on that. If I missed anything, or if somehow I slipped up on a word or something, I know there'll be a Twitter record for it. And I know Jane will hold us accountable on Twitter there as well. Suffice to say, we've received a lot of correspondence on this. I hope we receive more. I am somebody who reads everything that we get, take very seriously all of the public input that we receive, and I try to take that to heart. We did that on all the major zoning changes and all the major planning decisions that we've made. We'll continue to do that as we move forward. It'll be particularly important to do that here, but that's why it's increasingly important that events like this, where people understand what is going on, and that you engage with me and with my colleagues to make sure that all voices in the community are heard. We're always not necessarily so good in local government at reaching out and hearing from the wide variety of voices in the community. And so it's important, and it's why groups like yours and organizations like yours and people like Jane and her colleagues are so important to raise awareness to these issues. They're all recorded, so you can watch at a later date. I know some people work for a living and aren't exactly able to tune into a 3-hour committee session mid-morning or mid-afternoon, but I hope you'll go out and check that out. They're all available on the council website. The basic idea here that we are addressing, the overarching objectives, are all good. I think we all share them for the most part. Economic performance and competitiveness, racial equity and social inclusion, and environmental resilience. There are nuanced details of how to get there, how to accomplish the goals that we have. Some think it goes too far, some think it doesn't go far enough, some think it's too specific, some people think it's not specific enough. We've certainly heard up to this point arguments on all sides and everywhere in between. I don't believe this is an issue where there are only two sides, because land use is extremely complicated. And I take that nuance very seriously. It's also more complicated if we were an area that only had open fields. It would be very easy to Sim City this thing and figure out what the perfect community would look like for 2025, 2035, 2045, and 2055. But we don't. 85% of the county's land mass is already developed. It's already spoken for, and we have certain restrictions on others. And so it makes these changes, these decisions, and this strategic plan increasingly harder. Frankly, our work is harder than it was in Montgomery County in 1964, because there was so much of the county that was largely a blank slate, and we are building off of a built environment, which is certainly complicated and a challenge. So look forward to that. I will say that much of the document, whether it's right or wrong, goes too far or not far enough, whether it's too detailed or not detailed enough, it's for the most part not filled with new ideas. In many ways, it is building off of ideas that have already begun, some of which have started to be implemented, some of which have been discussed and not implemented. I do think we've done quite a bit of work already on issues that are discussed in the general plan in Thrive. And I'm proud in many ways to be a partner with you on a lot of issues. Jane mentioned a few of them, and I feel like I've been a strong ally on some of the most important issues that this organization advocates for. And I'm proud of the fact that we've partnered together, and I think been effective on a number of areas. When you look at the growth and infrastructure policy, we ended the moratorium. I led the effort to end the moratorium countywide, which was significant. It didn't solve the problem it intended to solve, and it added to our housing crisis, which disincentivized the building of new housing at a time when we're building dramatically less housing than we were when I grew up in Montgomery County in the 1980s and 1990s. and we are nowhere near the amount of housing that we need, and we are facing the consequences right now, frankly. We see the residential housing market in Montgomery County. We have increased demand and suppressed supply, and it leads to really troubling outcomes where most normal people can't afford to live most places in the county in an appropriate home for them, their spouse, them alone, or their family. And that's something that we have to address in a serious way. We eliminated the traffic tests for red areas. That's significant because those traffic tests led to infrastructure oftentimes that were car focused and not urban, pedestrian, and bicyclist focused. And so we were basically creating a test where in order to pass it, you had to build infrastructure that frankly we don't even want, and really set us on a bad pathway. We reduced impact taxes to better align our county with our regional counterparts to be more competitive in the region. We shouldn't be taxing new residents for the cost of existing residents. We should all be sharing the cost of public infrastructure. We should all be sharing the cost to educate and to build transportation infrastructure that we need to create the type of community that we all want. We shouldn't view new residents as a burden, and we have to get out of that disastrous language where a new resident is a burden to the community. It's a blessing to have people want to live in our community, and we should act that way. We should think that way. We should have policies that move us forward that way. I feel very strongly about that. I've tried to legislate with those values in mind. I crafted a desired growth area focus where we incentivize growth along current and future transit lines, in addition to some significant changes that we made with purple line areas, including them as red areas, which incentivize their growth there, and some of the other significant changes that we made. But it was significant improvement to make us more competitive in the region, to make housing more affordable, to have a more accessible community for more residents. I'm really proud of all the work that we did together. Jane mentioned the ADUs. I'm really proud of the work that we did together on that. To get to a 9-0 vote on that issue is remarkable. I think it really shows a lot of hard work behind the scenes, a lot of effective advocacy outside of the council, a lot of hard work within the council. I'm proud of the work that we did there. We already did a pilot program, a payment in lieu of taxes for HOC, the Housing Opportunities Commission that I worked on. I convened the stakeholders, and we addressed that issue to make it more streamlined so that we can move forward with more public housing projects. We had started the process then, and ultimately are about to have a bill to legislate for nonprofit providers to provide the same type of benefit to nonprofit affordable housing providers that we afford to the Housing Opportunities Commission. Again, to add certainty to the process. If you want to build affordable housing in Montgomery County to help house more residents in dignified, accessible, affordable housing, we should be doing what we can to help you. And this is just the latest example. Councilmember Reamer and I have been working on this literally for 2 years. It got held up a little bit because of the pandemic, but we're ready to move forward on that. And I'm proud of the work we've done there. You all are familiar with the WMATA bill that we did, which is significant. I led the effort to change the baseline for affordable housing funding for the HIF, adding $5 million to that, working on that, and proud of the work that we did there. That is now the new baseline that we start every year with, and we built from there. And then we worked on creating and leveraging a revolutionary new fund to leverage $50 million in affordable housing for HOC, a dedicated fund to accelerate their pipeline. There are already projects that are breaking ground today that were accelerated because of that program, and will continue to accelerate and will lead to thousands of new units much faster than they ever would have occurred. It's part of the all hands on deck, every tool at our disposal. There is no one size fits all, but we can't solve our housing crisis just by restricting things and just by retaining existing housing. We have to build new housing to create housing for new residents. We made a ton of changes on Vision Zero. I'm proud of the work that we've done there. I won't go into detail on that because I want to get to your questions. A lot of work on growing our economy. As Many of you know that's a big focus of mine, creating the culture of yes that has helped those open streets happen. The idea of creating that and making that happen in government was not as common as I would like. It's become more common during the pandemic. The crisis has helped us get there. So really proud of that as well. Turning back to the Thrive specifically, the emphasis on complete communities, that's building on the work that we have started. The details of that we're working out, we'll have to work out, we'll discuss, we'll debate. There's lots of opinions on it. But a streetery is an example of infrastructure and things that are in a complete community. That is the idea that we're looking for, the placemaking work that we're doing in the Pike District, the rethinking of the way that we do public infrastructure, what public infrastructure means, the sidewalk bill that I put in place. And what is a sidewalk? What should a sidewalk be? Do we treat it like it's a street as it's public infrastructure, that we only block it if it's absolutely necessary, like we block a road? Or do we put a fire hydrant in the middle of the sidewalk because it doesn't really matter? Or do we allow construction crews to sit in a sidewalk for months on end, obstructing the public right-of-way for pedestrians to utilize? People want livable, walkable, accessible communities. We need to create and build the communities that we want, that residents increasingly expect, that businesses are looking for and want to create. And then from an environmental perspective, we have been working on reducing vehicle miles traveled, getting people out of single occupancy vehicles. In order to do that, we need jobs near people, and we need accessible ways for people to access public transportation so they don't need to get into a single occupancy car to get to work. They need to be able to access it. And we know it's clear that the more affordable housing you have closer to public transit, the less likely that person is going to own a car. At the local level, the most impactful things that we can do when it comes to environmental policy are land use and transportation. That is the core of what our job is when it comes to reducing our carbon footprint. I'm proud of the work that we've done. I co-led the effort for green energy building tax credits, a number of other areas. We can move the needle a little bit in other areas, and we should do all of them because we're in a crisis. But unless we are serious about land use and unless we are serious about public transportation and transit options, we will never meet the climate crisis at the local level. And so we need to make sure that we're doing that. So with that, look forward to answering any questions. Happy to discuss this issue. Obviously, we're just in the early stages of this, so I'm still at a high level and haven't been diving into the details. I think there are like 159 or 158 specific recommendations, something like that. Jane is going to correct me if I get the numbers slightly off. But it's a lot to go through, and we'll be going through them one by one and making sure that we are hearing all the voices that need to be heard.
Thank you so much. And now you see why I couldn't list all of the really great initiatives related to our issues that you've worked on, because there are simply too many. But I knew I'd forgotten something that was really important, and that's ending the housing moratorium, which you mentioned my Twitter. I was just tweeting about the other day because the annual schools test came out, and if that policy hadn't been changed, then there would be some pretty significant parts of the county that are places where we want to see new housing and new growth that would have been under a housing moratorium. So that was really consequential, along with the many other policies that are in that package as well. And in that conversation, how you framed it about how we needed to not put up these invisible walls around our communities. So I wanted to draw that out as well. And so I invited people in the chat to go ahead and put your questions in. I know you'll all have lots of really great questions, but while people think of those questions and put them into the chat, I'd like to start out by asking you to speak a little bit. You just spoke on how land use is connected with climate change, which I'm super glad to hear you talk about, especially because the county's climate action plan does not really talk about land use as a strategy for reducing greenhouse gas emissions at all. Or now it talks about it a little bit more, but doesn't really include it as a strategy. Could you talk a little bit about how land use is also connected with economic development?
Land use is economic development. I don't think you can separate the two. I'm relentlessly focused on economic development. I think many people see me as that being the kind of key focus of mine, but that is intrinsically linked. It's the reason why the Planning, Housing, and Economic Development Committee exists. These are issues that are part and parcel to one another. You can't talk about jobs without talking about where the workers are going to go and how the people are going to do the work and how people get around from where they're going to where they want, where the businesses are going to locate, how people are going to obtain goods and services. All that comes down to land use, and it's the greatest power we have. It's the most significant lever we have, and it's also the most significant area of greenhouse gas that exists. Where buildings are, how people access those buildings is central. The way people live is absolutely existential to a crisis that is absolutely existential. And we can't be serious about dealing with climate at the local level unless we dive in specifically to transportation and to land use. It's why I have championed as hard as I can transit-oriented development. Most of my work has been focused on that. When it comes to land use patterns, I have been fervently supportive of the type of communities, livable, walkable, accessible communities. They're healthier, they're safer, they're more vibrant. It's what people want. It's how you attract residents. It's how you attract businesses. It's how you attract the type of private investment that we need to grow our economy. I push back on the executive branch specifically on that issue related to the climate plan. When we met, I said specifically that I think it was a glaring weakness in the document. We need, to think through implementation, which is really the executive's role, and primarily, you can't have a document talking about land use, talking about the environmental crisis that we're in and climate at the local level, unless you're specifically talking about land use and transportation. I'm glad that they added something, but I think what they've added falls short of what most of us would expect in a document like this that deals with an issue like climate.
Thank you. I'm going to first go to Mike English, who put a question in the chat, but I'll also ask him if he would like to unmute himself. Let's see if I can ask him that. So that way you can ask your own question.
All right, yeah, now it's letting me. So I've been testimonies and tweets, as you've seen, but yes, thank you for all you've done, Councilmember Friedson. And yeah, the housing moratorium was sort of my gateway drug to a lot of this, so definitely appreciate your leadership on that and all these other issues. But as I've highlighted a few times, including last week, all for missing middle housing, all these things, like we absolutely need them. We need more income restricted housing, all that stuff. One thing that I think has been a little bit lost lately is allowing like small to medium apartment buildings and condo buildings in more areas than they are now. Like, for example, I'm in one that's directly across the street from a single family neighborhood, and I think that works just fine. Do you have any thoughts on, if not just missing middle, if those should be allowed in more areas than they are now, particularly near transit? And assuming you agree, how best to get there?
Yeah, it's a really good question. We have a lot of work to do to figure out this answer, and I don't have the answers yet. I believe that we need a far greater diversity of housing types, and I think that's the conversation that we're having. Specifically where we land on that, I think there's work to be done. I do believe that having Thrive go first and talk about the type of community we want to build, and then following that with a strategy of how we get there, specifically with an implementation document, is the right approach. I advocated for that approach. I am big on policy. I might be even bigger on process. I know that upsets certain people because obviously as an advocate, you want everything now. But I think in order to get the coalition that you need to get buy-in to the issues that we all care about and want to address, we have to do it right. We have to do it the right way and in a thoughtful way. I think we're moving back in that direction, which I'm happy about. But the answer to the broad question is Yes, I believe we need a greater diversity of housing types. Specifically, what should be allowed, exactly where. We got a lot of work sessions to get through to figure that out. And I am entering it with the broad philosophy of the greater diversity of housing types and the fact that we have a housing crisis, but with a flexible mind of figuring out, how exactly we address that, understanding that, land use is nuanced, that we have to, do this in a thoughtful and methodical way. And I think anybody who's followed my work, even if you would disagree with me, I hope would say that I approach my work that way, and will here certainly. And I appreciate all your advocacy. So thank you, Mike.
The devil is always in the details. Next, I'm going to go to Zach. I'll ask you to unmute so you can ask your question.
Hi. First, I wanted to thank you for all the work that you've done so far and for taking the time to talk with us tonight. It's really great to have an advocate on the council. You talked about reducing vehicle miles traveled before, and I really support that goal. I was wondering whether you had any views on reducing parking in the county. Right now, the county operates lots of public parking garages in downtown areas near transit, and there are surface parking lots. And the government also has mandatory minimums where developers have to build parking, possibly on land that doesn't really need parking. So these policies, I think, harm the goal of reducing vehicle miles traveled. I was wondering if you had any thoughts on whether the county has too many parking spots provided, and any thoughts on how that could hinder the goal.
The answer is yes. Ultimately, I do think that we have to get to a more market-based solution to parking. And I think we have, for too long, in many ways, subsidized, certain behaviors, not even realizing that we were subsidizing them. The idea that you subsidize transit but you don't subsidize road is of course preposterous, because most people don't drive on a toll road every day, and yet they drive on a road every day. The gas tax does not cover the cost of the road. In fact, the county doesn't collect the gas tax, and the state doesn't cover county roads for the most part. There are highway user funds. I could go into graphic detail from my old days in the comptroller's office. I don't think anybody cares about, but the point is we do subsidize behaviors all the time. We have for decades. And we have to separate that out and really think through what we're doing, what it means, and what impacts that it has on our society, on each other, on the communities that we build. That's true of the infrastructure that we build and the roads, which I've been trying really hard to change that. But it's also true with parking. So a couple things. One, the parking issue is a challenge because you have this balance of, for instance, local retailers that are struggling, and we want to support local retailers for that sense of place and that vibrancy of community. And then you have the issue of a parking lot district, which I have said is a totally backwards and broken model, because we can't get out of it. It's like a drug that we're addicted to, because we have bonds that are basically or being paid for by people doing exactly what we're trying to create policies to avoid. And so we have all of these examples in county government and in government in general, where we have financed an activity that we don't necessarily agree with, or that we're trying to move away from. And then we wonder why we have fiscal problems. And then we wonder why people's behaviors aren't changing. So the answer is yes, long-term, absolutely. And there are immediate steps we can take. I've been a champion to turn parking lots into places. That's part of what the WMATA bill is all about. Those are surface parking lots and the what should be the most vibrant gateways of and in and connecting communities. It's a whole. It should be a hub for a community. And I think there are so many examples of that in urban areas all through the county, whether it's Silver Spring, Bethesda, Wheaton, you name it. But that's what we're working on with the Bethesda Farm Women's Market, which was central to the downtown Bethesda plan, turning a parking lot into a park, which I want to do more of. I see Amanda Farber is on the call, and in East Bethesda, there's a number of parking lots, all part of that plan as well, that we want to turn those, county parking lots into a greenway. And there are, significant changes that we can make. I've championed disaggregating parking, from buildings. I do think that the mandatory minimums and the requirements that we put, it adds costs, it makes housing more expensive, and it incentivizes the behavior we're increasingly trying to avoid. It's literally addicting somebody to a drug and then wondering why we have to pay for their treatment. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So yes, we need to get out of it, but yes, it's also very complicated. There are major fiscal consequences to some of those decisions because we've tangled ourselves in a web of madness. Also there are impacts on vulnerable folks, including, small businesses, local retailers, that we have to bring them along and figure out how to help them, support them, and how to move out of, what is a negative consequence on the type of communities we're trying to build.
Thank you. And that was a great transition because Amanda Farber asked the next question. So I'm going to ask her if she wants to unmute to ask her question, or I can read it from the chat.
Yes, sure. I'm happy to ask it. Well, and let me just start by saying, Andrew, or Councilmember Friedson, I cannot thank you enough for the work
Andrew's
that you
fine.
have done, for the work you've done for parks and for open streets. This past year, it has made a huge difference to the community and the county. So major props for that. And yes, this ended up being a better segue than I could have even imagined, because my question was regarding properties which already have approvals, particularly properties that are in transit-oriented areas where we do want to see housing and development. And those properties may have been sitting vacant for years and becoming increasingly blighted, where it would be so much better to see some housing on those properties. And these are properties that have approvals. So my question was, what is the county doing to encourage developers to actually utilize those proposals and help with the housing crisis in these areas? We are hearing that some developers are holding back for the market, but we're also hearing that there's a crisis. So there's a number of locations even in downtown Bethesda, but throughout the county, that are ripe for redevelopment, but it's just not happening. And you mentioned the parking lot district. So let me just say one comment about that, which is we recently learned about the 8,000 Wisconsin project, which was supposed to use a county parking lot and contribute to the parking lot district to provide redevelopment, to provide additional housing, to provide affordable housing. And we have now learned that it is delayed for who knows how long. And so that's contributing to some of the parking lot district woes. And also it could provide additional housing there. And like you said, there's surface parking lots in East Bethesda, in downtown Bethesda, that could be much better utilized. The Farm Women's Market is a fantastic project. And I really hope it goes forward. But how do we encourage that development that is already approved, but where they are holding back moving forward?
It's a terrific question. One, the county can't necessarily dictate the market, right? And I would say we can only nurture nature, nature being economics, and ultimately rational actors are going to make rational decisions. All we can do is create a framework where rational decisions lead to good outcomes more often than not. And that's the challenge that we face. That Montgomery County, we want to be more attractive to invest in. We want somebody to get a higher return on it. I am one who believes that a profit isn't a bad thing. People need to get bank loans in order to make these projects work. A lot of it is related to financing, and it's not just zoning, and it's not just the approval process. So the approval process is part of it, but we're never going to be in a position where 100% of the zoning gets built out. And I think we have to get out of this idea that we can't move forward on one set of zoning until that set of zoning is completed, because that's not how zoning works. If that were the case, then we shouldn't do anything until every single family home gets knocked down and built to the lot lines and the setback and the height requirements, which, you know, I don't think anybody would suggest, but it's the equivalent of what, you know, is sometimes talked about as this false equivalency in the urban infill development. So I share your concern, Amanda. I know you and I are on the same team here. We want some of these projects to move forward. I want them to move forward yesterday. The county could be doing more. I've tried to make the county as competitive as I possibly can. I have been urging that. I have tried to put in place policies. I've tried to be an advocate for that, a champion and a cheerleader. I think some of it is reality and some of it is perception of the county's competitiveness. And we need to address both. And I think we have tried and are on our way to doing just that. But we're never going to be in a situation where all the zoning is maxed out that exists. And I just want to get out of the narrative that until one set of zoning is built out, we shouldn't move on to the next set of zoning, because I don't think that particular viewpoint is a realistic one. And I think it will hold the county back.
All right. And the next question is from Paul Meyer. And he's going to ask about open streets, but I also want to say that, oh, sorry, Amanda wanted to respond before that. Are you able to unmute now?
Oh, yes. I just wanted to give one specific example related to this discussion, which is the county is requiring 1-for-1 parking replacement for some of the proposed projects and some of the proposed properties. And to me, that's part of what might potentially be holding them back, because as we all know, undergrounding parking is extremely expensive. And so to look at it with a little in a little bit more detail to determine whether that parking is actually needed in certain locations might be beneficial for the county, but up until this point, they have been sort of unwilling to do so. And part of it is some nearby development projects are counting on that county provided parking to make up for the fact that they are providing reduced parking. So it's sort of like a little give and take happening, but there is opportunity to look at the parking situation.
Yeah, I think that's true,
and adjust
Amanda.
that.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I'll just say, I think there is some change to the way that is being viewed at. I wouldn't say that it's 100% changed, but I would say that there's at least a willingness to think through it from the county's perspective. Historically, there would never have been a consideration of anything less than 1-for-1 parking. And I think with the Bethesda Farm Women's Market and some others, there's at least a consideration for that to be discussed. And I think it shows progress on these issues, but you know, they're complicated, as I mentioned before.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Amanda. And now we'll go to Paul Meyer, ask him to unmute to ask his question about open streets. But I also wanted to say that there's a comment in the chat from Carolyn, who says that they agree with everyone, thanking you for your support of parks and open streets. As a resident of a condo in South Silver Spring, the Acorn Park Newell Street closure has been an amazing asset. So wanted to boost what Paul's about to say with that comment as well. Thanks, Carolyn.
Carolyn's actually my neighbor. We live in the same building, and I just saw her outside on Newell Street. But anyway, so I wanted to thank you, council member, for your support of open streets, especially the open street on Newell Street. But what I wanted to know is, do you support it countywide, and do you support going big on it? Because I'd like to see that.
Well, it's a great question. First of all, I authored and led the council resolution on open streets to talk about expanding it well beyond the pandemic. So I think I've been as big a champion on this as anybody. on the council. I think we ought to look at it bigger and broader. I do think there are nuances to this, and I think you want to make sure that you do it right. I think it's been done in a very thoughtful way, but it hasn't been easy in certain circumstances, and so you've had to work through some of those issues. Even the Bethesda Streetery, it was tremendous work by Bethesda Urban Partnership to work with the retailers to figure out when their employees had to come and leave and when drop off of products were, and how to work through those issues. We're able to work through it. It's because of the culture of yes. So we got to start with the culture of yes. We got to be open to the opportunities to be able to do this, particularly for residential neighborhoods. DC followed us on this, which I think is a source of pride for Montgomery County residents, or at least should be. And I think we could continue to look at it. I think the Department of Transportation picked up where Parks and BUP and some of the urban districts left off. And I think there's certainly an opportunity, again, like I said, to rethink public infrastructure in a broad way. What that means for a particular street at a particular time, that needs to be worked out sensitively, dealing with the context of the community members and the uses, and make sure that everybody's needs are served. But we should be open to it. A road should be for people, and we should figure out what is the best use at particular times for that, and make sure that we're serving the community needs with public infrastructure.
And before we move on, could you explain a little bit about what the Open Streets resolution was? Because I don't know if everybody knows exactly what that said and entailed.
Yeah, we passed a resolution strongly urging it was really the Parks Department and the executive branch, because those are the two implementing agencies, to look at continuing the Open Streets program. There are a lot of different open streets. They're created equally. There was the Street Dine in Silver Spring, there's Acorn Park, there's Beach Drive, there's Little Falls Parkway.
Oh no, I think you're cutting out a little bit, Andrew. Oh no. We'll give him a second, see if he comes back.
Did I lose you?
Oh, yes, you're there. You're there.
All right. So I was saying, we put in place a resolution to urge the executive branch and the Parks Department, who are the implementing agencies, for these open street concepts, because they're not all created equally. There's a difference between Little Falls Parkway, Beach Drive, and Sligo Creek, and Acorn Park, and Bethesda Streetery, and the Street Dine, and Germantown. But we, strongly urging them to continue these programs beyond the pandemic. The original thought process was these were pandemic specific solutions to address the fact that indoor dining was shut down, to address the fact that people needed places to safely go and recreate outside. And we're saying, well, you know what? They worked pretty well. Let's look to continue them. A perfect example is Norfolk Avenue. That's long-term planned as a pedestrian street. And we're working hard to try to accelerate those plans. It's working. The community is loving it and utilizing it. It's good for business. It's good for the county. It's good for people. Let's continue it to the greatest extent we can, and let's look to see if we can continue all the other programs and beyond as well.
And we have another comment from Stu about specifically that, and thanking you for that, and for Little Falls Parkway as well. I think we have time for one more question. Time really flies. So I want to ask Allison, where are you? I'll ask you, Allison, to unmute if you want to ask your question.
Sure. Andrew, thank you so much for all you do. And, I'm loving the Open Streets shout outs. It's been fantastic to have you doing that work. And you've been a fantastic advocate for Vision Zero and pedestrian safety. And you also do a lot of really good stuff on parks. I'm specific to Thrive. I think that there's so much good about urban parks in the plan. And I think so much about what it says about parks is great. It really embraces our urban identity in an honest way and looks at how we can maximize the benefits for lots and lots of people. I'm a little concerned though, the fact that there's not a specific chapter on the environment and that there isn't much that addresses the environment outside of parks and public lands. And especially I'm disappointed because I think the executive's climate plan, I'm going to be really frank, was just a giant disappointment. No land use and just really didn't take it by the horns. I wondered if you could talk about that a little bit. I am worried about the climate crisis. I think it's going to have huge economic and health impacts for us going forward. And what kinds of ways could we, I'd like to see it get put back in the plan a little bit.
Well, first of all, you deserve a lot of credit for Open Streets and all your advocacy. So thank you. And before that and beyond that on Vision Zero, you've been a terrific advocate. So thank you for that. And you've been an advocate countywide, not just in your community, and you deserve a lot of credit for that as well. A couple things on this. It's a really legitimate point, and it's always an issue with a document like this. Do you sprinkle something throughout and make it part of the core, fundamental aspect of it, or do you single and specifically, discuss it as a standalone item, or do you do both? And I think it's something that we ought to really think through as we, mark up this document. I think you raise a very important point. I don't believe that you can talk about the strategic plan for land use and infrastructure in the county and not talk about climate. So I do think that it's a core part of what Thrive is attempting to do, but I think it's a very valid criticism to say that perhaps it isn't singled out in a way and highlighted specifically in a way that perhaps it could. And that's something that I'll, take to heart and really look through as we mark this up, and totally agree with you on that. And I will say on the parks issue, I have probably been the leading advocate on parks and trails in my time on the council. I'm the parks lead. I take that role really seriously. I'm not just an advocate of the parks, I am a frequent user of the parks. I don't know if I would have survived the pandemic on a personal level, frankly, if not for trails. I hike the trails regularly. Allison, I know you and I are overdue for a hike, so let's make that happen. But and I'm not alone. Trail use was up 40% through the pandemic. I mean, this was mental health, this was well-being, this was exercise for so many people. I fought back against cuts to parks every year since I've been on the council, including a huge cut in my first budget, $1.9 million in cuts. I said this is a cut to quality of life, and we fought back and put the money back in the budget, which has made a huge impact. And I've been a big advocate fighting to protect trails. Trails are transportation infrastructure. They're not just about recreation, what people do on the weekends. This is about how people get to where they're going. And something like the Capitol Crescent Trail, which we've had to fight a couple years in a row to get back in the budget. I've led the effort on that as well. This is a significant east-west transportation connection, 1 million users a year. Not just about recreation for people getting Silver Spring to Bethesda and back, or Bethesda to Georgetown. This is about people getting to and from work and to and from where they're trying to go. It's about having people be able to safely cross one of the most dangerous roads in the county. So appreciate you lifting that up. I will just say one last thing that I didn't mention before that we worked on was question A. You talked about the moratorium and the school test just coming out, Jane, earlier. We also have a new budget year that's about to start, and we're going to have a tax policy for the first time in 30 years that benefits from growth, that supports economic activity, that doesn't penalize us for the growth that we have, that isn't a tax policy that is based on not growing, that rewards the county for not growing in many ways. And I'm really proud of the coalition that we built on that as well. We're going to be able to do more. We're going to be able to attract more investment. We're going to be able to invest in more to build on our success because of that. And I think the county residents deserve a lot of credit for having the foresight to vote overwhelmingly to reform our tax policy, the most progressive property tax change in the county in 3 decades.
All right, with that, it is 8:02, so I think we were pretty good on time. And I really appreciate everyone asking such great questions and all of your great answers, Councilmember Friedson, and for you taking the time to be with us here tonight. So clap emoji, clap react on here on Zoom. I'm really looking forward to the next time that we all get together to be able to see each other in person. And as a reminder, that will be July 29th at the Acorn Knoll Street closure that everyone was talking about, being huge fans of. So I look forward to hopefully seeing a bunch of you then, and to seeing you very soon as well. Councilmember Friedson, thanks again for being here tonight.
Absolutely. I hope to see you at Acorn Park. If not, I hope to see you at Acorn Park before the meeting, because I'll be there before then, I'm sure.
Nice. Great. All right. Well, everybody have a great night. Take care.